Hi.
Hi, I'm with Alli Hoff Kosik. She is a debut author. This is actually your last day of your life as an unpublished author, which I
Ouch.
know this is
Yeah.
a lifelong goal for you. Today marks the last day, and tomorrow you will be a published debut author of Too Blessed to Stress, which is a coming of age book. So we're here to talk about that and other coming of age books that were on Gilmore Girls, which is what we do around here at Friday Night Readers. So welcome, Allie.
Thank you so much for having me. I am a Gilmore Girls fan of many years, and you and I have been friends and fans of each other for many years. So I feel this is a good way to celebrate my last night. It feels like the night before you go away to college or something.
And we had met many years ago. I had pitched you. You were my first podcast ever. And we talked
Yes.
about Encyclopedia Brown. And for anyone who
Hmm.
doesn't know, Allie ran SSR podcast, which was about reading books from your childhood with a new lens as an adult and in modern times. So Encyclopedia Brown fit perfect in that. And we have a lot of other books on Gilmore Girls that fit perfectly in that as well.
Yeah. Rory gave us so much material to work with. So it was a very easy fit.
Yeah, and let me just read your bio real quick for anyone who is new to you.
Great.
Alli Hoff Kosik is a writer based in Philadelphia, the former host of SSR podcast. Her work has been published in Marie Claire, Real Simple, Business Insider, and Cosmopolitan. Too Blessed to Stress is her first book. And I will link Allie's Instagram in the show notes.
Say
Welcome,
hi.
Allie.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
So, before we talk about your book, I thought it would be good to talk about what is a coming of age book. And I think if anyone is a pro at this, it's got to be you. You've gone through hundreds of these childhood books.
It's so interesting because I've gone through hundreds of them and also hundreds of them written through so many decades and eras. And so it's what's the common thread? What are we writing for young people in all of these different times? And also before A wasn't always a category. So middle grade wasn't always a category. So the fact that there are these common themes even before publishers are thinking about books that way, I think is really interesting. I think a coming of age book is really about some seminal moment in a young person's life and there being a clear demarcation before and after. And there can be a huge range. And I think that's what was so interesting about SSR is examining all of the different things that can exist as that turning point. Of course, in Judy Blume's books, a lot of it is about puberty or love. Book Forever, it's about the main character losing her virginity. But there are other books where it's maybe smaller things or more fantastical things, entering a magical world and not knowing if you can get home again, maybe setting out on an adventure by yourself or figuring something out on your own and learning something about yourself. I think that's a huge part of coming of age because there's generally a lot of missing adults in a coming of age book. What I have learned, my hypothesis, is that when you take the adults out, it forces the kids to figure themselves out. So I think a lot of it too is okay, what happens when the adults fade to the background? And that's where you get the coming of age story.
So I always think of it very similar to you, like a before and an after. To me, the way I always say is that life is never the same again, no matter what it is,
Hmm.
whether it's just thinking differently some way, whether it's a tragedy that literally does change life completely. I just look at it as, like you said, that line of demarcation, something before and something after. Do you have any age range on what you think? I think coming of age really can go into adulthood. Do you
Hmm.
agree or disagree on that?
I agree. I think outside of the book world, I think a lot of us in real life still feel like we're coming of age, even into our 30s. I said maybe we do it more than once. So, yeah, I think there are middle grade coming of age stories where it's that first moment of independence or self recognition. And then there's these high school coming of age stories, maybe those college coming of age stories where it's about stepping out of the rules that you once had for yourself, maybe a more literal leaving home. And then, yeah, I think sometimes we as 20 somethings and even into our early 30s need to find other ways to come of age. And so there are adult books that also highlight that shift. What do you think?
I agree. I definitely think it goes into adulthood. And even I'm over 40 now. So I can even say there's still things that I've never experienced before that you
Yeah.
experience for the first time. And that really is that same sort of experience that you would have. Maybe it's a little bit more advanced, but you still could look at something completely different and feel like there's this before and after, and you are now a new person.
Yeah, absolutely. And why shouldn't we keep coming of age. Maybe the marketing of it is different from the publisher
Right.
perspective, and
That's a
maybe
good point.
yeah, because it's,
We
you know,
want to always come of age, don't
we
we?
should be. Should we always have that opportunity? And I understand that maybe it's not super sexy from a publishing perspective to be highlighting that as something that adults should be reading about. But when you really distill what most stories are, there's always a version of coming of age. It's just not really part of the main pitch, which is the real like value proposition, I think, of a middle grade or a YA book is you're getting somebody coming of age. But that doesn't mean that it's not happening somewhere in
Yeah,
any
we
book.
may see it more like a second chance romance,
Yeah.
a second act trope.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's true. I think that's romance books. There's a coming of age if you're in a new relationship. I think friendship stories often give characters a chance to come of age. Stories where people they become parents. That's something that I'm continuing to
Yes.
experience now. I almost feel like I come of age every other day when my child is doing something different and hard, or stories about work. I just think it's okay for us all to be figuring it out at all times. It's just we don't always think of it in those terms of coming of age.
Yeah, good point. So, one of the things I thought that was interesting about this conversation and trying to tie together the books that we read on Gilmore Girls at Friday Night
Mm,
Readers and your book, Too Blessed to Stress, which has coming of age themes. And I also thought it was interesting that not only does Gilmore Girls have all of these coming of age books on the show, but it also really is a coming of age show. So, I know you're a super fan. So, how do you see coming of age on Gilmore Girls?
I think Rory and Lorelai are constantly figuring life out both together and independently. I think we see at some point, even later on, if we're looking at all of the Gilmore girls, even Emily in A Year in the Life, whether you love it or hate it, I think Emily is also coming into this new chapter of her own life at that stage. I think Rory, especially, is trying to sort out how much does she want to stay linked to this very small loving but small and confined world that she's grown up in versus how much does she want to take advantage of these other options that are offered to her. And yes, there are of course the boyfriends, and I think they represent different parts of what that could look like. And that is it's easy for us to grab on to the team Jeff, the team Dean, team Logan of it all, but each of them is just giving her another choice of what her life could look like as she comes of age. And she finds a lot of that through books, which is cool. So much of Rory's journey is driven not only by books, but by other pop culture, which is one of the reasons that we love her. And I think why millennials in particular just can't help but attach themselves to her because it's the same references that helped us come of age.
I always think of Rory as for her coming of age, life in the real world is so much harder than Stars Hollow. She was in this safe
Hmm.
space for so long. And then all of a sudden she meets Mitchum Huntsberger and she goes off the rails. She does come
Yeah.
back, but that's how I look at Rory's coming of age trajectory. I like how you compared it to sliding doors. And I think that is true because even in A Year in the Life, we see Jess is in there a little bit. I personally think A Year in the Life shows that Logan's the baby daddy, but we do see these threads of what it would look like with different people.
Yeah. I think that it shows us that any version would probably be okay. Coming of age is maybe about realizing that most paths that you pick in a version of most of those paths, it would be okay. Is one going to be the best choice for you? Absolutely. But throughout the course of the series, Rory does try on all of these different futures. If you think about when she dresses up that night for Dean and does the homemaking thing, that's one version of that story. She does the more rebellious thing for Jess when she skips her mom's graduation. I go on and on. I'm happy to go toe to toe with everybody on Gilmore Girls for you. But I also think I love what you said about Rory gets out into the real world and realizes how hard it's something that I think about a lot because I was such a stress case in high school. I was a disaster. I just thought that everything was so high stakes. I thought that every choice that I made was going to dictate my whole future. I could not possibly work hard enough. And I think that's why I connected with Rory so much. This is somebody who gets it. This is somebody who
Mhm.
understands why I'm so stressed out all the time and understands why my friends and I care so much about all this stuff. And it is so interesting to get to the other side of it along with Rory, because of course she's also taken that journey. And you realize, okay, that stuff, it wasn't that high stakes. And all of this other stuff is actually way harder, which is the
Exactly.
wrong for sure.
I was very much like Rory too, and I think that people like me and you and Rory, we think that we can academically work our way through
Yeah.
life. And then you get to life and realize, oh no, we're actually not prepared for this, and this is really hard, and there are a lot of gray areas.
Yeah, and you wish you could academically work yourself through life because for so many years it's yes, if you can do well in school, then you're going to move to the next stage and people will tell you're doing a good job. And the next step is probably also going to go well. And then something changes and it's not that simple.
Exactly. And before we move on, I do want to know I loved how you talked about Emily coming into her own because I really see a year in the life as Emily's story. And we talked
Mm,
about how coming of age really can happen at any age. And I think she's the perfect example of that. And I also wanted to make note of Lane because
yes.
Lane's story is very religious undertones, or maybe overtoned, you would say. To me, her coming of age story is balancing religion with real life.
Mm.
That's also a theme in Too Blessed to Stress. So, what do you think of Lane's religious and life journey and coming of age on the show?
Of course, talking about Emily, I would be remiss if I did not wish Kelly Bishop a happy birthday. Is it today or
Yeah,
yesterday? I've
I
been seeing
believe
all
it
the
was
memes.
Saturday.
Oh, okay. We should be celebrating all week. Happy birthday, Kelly Bishop.
Yes.
So yes, there is some serious Lane energy happening in Too Blessed to Stress. I think, and I didn't have the word for it when I was watching the show, but what we see Lane doing in Gilmore Girls is deconstructing. Like she's deconstructing what she learned spiritually, religiously, even just in terms of the rules of her family and her house. It's not just about her faith, it's about her household. And I had a lane when I was in high school. And I talked about this a little bit on the podcast miniseries I did, BTS, TBTS, and how I realized all these years later that one of my best friends in high school was much more involved in her church than I knew at the time. And a lot of the vocab words that she was using, I didn't realize until all these years later were wrapped up in this megachurch evangelical world that I would one day explore. So I think maybe without realizing it, when I was watching Gilmore Girls, I was making that connection. So I had a lane. And I think a lot of reflecting on that experience helped bring me to Too Blessed to Stress. But we see her discovering this other part of herself throughout the series. And I did try to get to that in different ways, like with the characters in my book. So, yes, that is, I would say each of the characters in my book deconstruct to different degrees and in different ways. But much like Lane, with an open heartedness to the world and with the help of their friends, because so much of Lane's journey is about Rory and Lorelai and his community that loves and supports her.
I think
And
it
my
makes
character.
sense that you had a lane in your life because I
Yeah.
could see how the way you described it, that she used words that you didn't
Yeah.
know were religious words. I could see how you would
I had
then
no idea.
hear them later, and then that
Yeah.
would make you intrigued to learn even more.
Yeah. My antenna popped up when I saw those words again on social media. But yes, I love the comparison that you made to Lane and my characters.
So maybe we can talk about the plot of Too Blessed to Stress. It is
Okay.
a book that delves into four different religious influencers who are in a megachurch. And in this process of being online, because being online is also part of it, they are coming into their own in different ways. They all have different struggles and they're dealing with issues. And this might sound very salacious, but I actually just think it's juicy without being salacious. It could sound judgmental, but it's really not. The tone that I
Yeah.
thought it took was a very observational, almost journalist like tone. You are just getting into the minds and lives of these four young women and
Yeah.
presenting it to the reader like a social commentary. And I think that you maintained a very nice light tone, which makes it good. We're coming into spring break. Our readers aren't really escapism readers. So I actually think this is perfect for them because it's light, but it also has all that social commentary that makes you think. I do think this would make a good spring break book for our readers. And I actually read it over summer vacation myself. And even just talking to you now, all these months later, it just makes me think of my time at the pool. So it's that
Yeah.
little mix of light, making you think, and book club vibes, but also not being too heavy and not preachy at all. It's really just presenting their lives for you and then think what you want from
Yeah.
that.
So the word that I hope people use to describe it is fresh more than light, because I think I really tried to approach it with this very specific, distinct voice that's very of the time. But I do think that influencers and the influencer world are too often written off as silly or just the stuff of reality TV. And it is so much more influential, for lack of a
Mhm.
better word, than that. It matters so much more than that because so many of the things that we think and talk about start online and start with very well intentioned movements and conversations that small groups are bringing to the table on Instagram and TikTok primarily. So I wanted to blend this very zeitgeisty topic with fresh characters that are very distinct, very nuanced, and well rounded. With a subject that I think is often underestimated in terms of its importance. And I was very careful not to make it too salacious. I always say that my number one rule in the book was that nobody was going to sleep with a pastor. That was my hard and fast thing. Getting this book published probably would have been easier if that
I
had
was gonna
been.
say, it sounds like that would have been easy.
It would have been. And the attention is a lighter touch than that. It's a big deal what happens in the book, but a sex scandal probably would have gotten the book out maybe a year ago because it would have been easier to sell. So I wanted it to be a little bit more complicated and I wanted it to feel very observational and in the vein of social commentary. I studied journalism. Journalism is how I was taught to see the world. And I put these four characters together based on a ton of observation and research. I really did not want to be punching down. That was not my goal. I've been very clear when I talk about the book in the acknowledgments. I am personally in opposition with a lot of the ideas and beliefs that the people that my characters are based on talk about. Their politics are in direct opposition to mine. But I connected with these people when I was researching them in other ways. And I thought that's what the interesting part was. How do I find what draws me to them? What do I have in common with them? What do my friends have in common with them? And I just wanted to write that. What are their stories separate from the church that are just as important to them? How do those things dovetail with the church, but also make us all relate to each other? And I do think that has yielded a book that does, by all accounts so far, it doesn't seem to give a judgmental tone, no punching down, no preaching on either side. This is what's happening. This is how the characters decide to approach it. And what do we think about that? Bring it to your book club. It is, I think, a great book club book because there's a lot of room to discuss how everybody handles themselves on the page.
Yes, I think the way I would describe it as social commentary, and I saw that Olivia Muntar just joined. Hi, Olivia, first of all. She's one of my favorite authors and podcasters. But one of the things I had in my notes, and the timing's funny that she just joined because I found that Philly based authors have written a lot about social commentary. So there's you. Olivia lived in Philly for a while, and
Yep.
her new book, Little One, is about a food cult. And then Joe
Hmm.
Piazza, everything she does is pretty much has some
Everything.
sort of social commentary. And then I know Kylie Reed was a mentor or teacher to you,
Yep.
and Such a Fun Age was also in that. So do you think that Philly has anything to do with it?
So funny. I hadn't made that connection before, but I think you're right. I can't claim I've only been in Philly for a couple of years. So I cannot claim Philly as I feel I need to have a couple more years. I lived in New York for about 10 years. I lived in Philly for about 5, almost 6. I do think that cities like Philly and New York, maybe Boston too, I think we can be a skeptical people. I think we pay attention in different ways, which is not to say that other people don't. I think we look at the world with a little bit of, I don't know, prove it to us. And I don't think that's necessarily such a bad thing. And we also, because we had bad weather, I don't know, we probably spend a lot more time on our phones and talking about what we're seeing.
Yeah, I think it's funny. I was talking to a friend last week about she's switching jobs and I said, "Oh, we liked your last job, didn't you?" This was a remote job. So people were from all around the world. And she said, "I didn't really like the vibe or the culture. People were into themselves." And I said, "I could totally see that because Philly is a place where we just are who we are. And maybe that's
Yeah,
part of it too."
maybe. Yeah. And one of the things that I learned the most from Kylie, because I was lucky enough to work very closely with her in grad school, and she is the master at writing about the awkwardness of human interactions and subtext around things like class and race and money. She loves to write about money. Nobody likes to write about what it actually means to make different amounts of money than Kylie Reid. And I think these cities are places where we see that on display, and there's not that much separation. There's a lot of mixing of people, and we know people who come from all different backgrounds. And so maybe we're more attuned to that part of it too, because that's where the juicy stuff in fiction and dynamics between characters happen is the subtext. Why does that make us cringe? And why are we all so uncomfortable? That's what's interesting, I think.
And that's really what people are going to get in Too Blessed to Stress.
I tried. I hope so. I absolutely loved writing those little moments between characters. This book does not take place in either of these cities. It actually takes place in Charlotte, North Carolina. So it's a departure. I will say the people I know who have read it from Charlotte say that it is pretty accurate to the experience of living there. So I'm happy about that. But my favorite moments in the book are just these little conversations among the girls. There's a brunch scene that was the most fun to write. And something that Kylie really pushed me to do is to pay attention to what's happening outside of the big moments and scenes like that. Because again, that's where the juicy stuff happens. It's not always the big,
Yes.
flashy conversation. But what's going on around the perimeter of that conversation and why does that matter?
So, on that note, I think that's actually the perfect note for my next question, which is how do you look at coming of age in the four girls in this book?
These are all characters who are in their early to mid 20s. There's one character who's just out of college, and her arc is probably the most obviously coming of age because she is in her first job and really learning how to operate outside of a competitive swimming environment, which has ruled her life forever. And so she very clearly is coming of age in this book. But I think all of the characters are figuring out how to navigate new parts of adulthood, finances, relationships, health challenges, all of these things that they probably never saw coming for themselves when they were younger. And like we were saying with Rory earlier, whatever they were dealing with in high school was way easier than this. They didn't expect that they would be dealing with any of this stuff when they were younger. They're going through that. And in the case of this book, they're also figuring out how much that jives or doesn't with this faith system that they have plugged into. And also, they're trying to figure out how much of it they want to share. And I love that tension in the book about what's the overlap between what we make public and what is our intimate relationship with God and the being that we think made us. And so I think in addition to just dealing with what's happening in the world, these characters are reckoning with those questions. What does this mean for what I believe? And how much of this do I want to share with the public? And those are things that make them maybe a little bit different than characters that are just living in the normal world and coming of age in their 20s,
Yeah, I think that perfectly describes it. It's coming of age in the context of influencing and religion.
which is hard to do. And if
And
you think of different issues, they're trying to figure out what are they going to comment on? What are they going to take a stand on? And if you think about the most popular influencers in real life, religious or otherwise, these are people who are in their 20s, often their early 20s. I would not particularly want to be coming of age in my early 20s on that public of a stage. And yes, these people have made that decision. But I think to our conversation before, we often think that we have come of age by the time we hit our early to mid 20s, but we're probably going to come of age again and again. And that's a surprise, I would imagine, for people who are on such a big stage.
so everyone can buy Too Blessed to Stress. We also decided to talk about four coming of age books that were on Gilmore Girls. And the way I did it was I looked through SSR podcast to see which ones you had also read because I thought that would be fun and I can link your episodes. And those episodes were great. I listened to all of them to prepare for today. So we're going to talk about four that were really popular with my readers at Friday Night Readers who read the books on Gilmore Girls, but that you also read on SSR podcast.
Perfect. I love elliptical. And I haven't listened to these episodes in a long time. It'll be fun to talk about them.
I think it's gonna jog your memory because I took down some notes. First,
Yeah.
I'm gonna talk about Huck Finn, and I noted that your husband describes him as Ferris Bueller, and I love that.
Which is so weird because my husband famously had never seen Ferris Bueller before we got together. So I am trying to remember what made him think that was maybe he was just trying to be cool because he knows that movie is really important to me and my family, as it is to so many people in their families.
He described it in the way that Huck goes on an adventure, and it's like a
Okay.
Ferris Bueller adventure. And
Okay.
Ferris Bueller is not the most likable character, and you can have those same questions about Huck as well.
Yeah. Okay. I'll give him that. That was a good comparison.
So I do want to give a plot description of Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and this is by Mark Twain in 1884. Huck Finn runs away from his abusive father and travels down the Mississippi River with Jim, a man who has escaped enslavement. Along the way, Huck and Jim encounter conmen, feuding families, and the hypocrisy of pre Civil War Southern society. And on Gilmore Girls, we see this in several episodes. It is actually the first book ever mentioned on the show. And it
Hmm.
is also in Rory's famous graduation speech. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on Huck Finn and why it was on Gilmore Girls.
I think they probably picked that book because most people, even if they haven't read it, they have some context for it. I do think there are some books included because there are a lot of other reference points for it. And even people who aren't readers have heard maybe a joke about a book. It's interesting now because the book has taken on so many other more controversial conversations, things about language. And of course, the dynamic between Huck and Jim is so much more complicated, I think, than most of us ever gave it credit for. If ASP were writing it now, there'd be some more nuance. There was the movie that came out in the 90s. People get it. It's the first book mentioned in the series. It's, oh, okay. I recognize that. Maybe I read it in school or I saw Huck.
So I was also thinking that Lee Sherman Palladino created the show when he was at the Mark Twain house. So I wondered if that was the reason she wanted Huck Finn to be the first book.
Yeah, that's a beautiful homage. I like that point. That's a really good point.
All right, so we'll go with that.
Yeah.
So, what do you think about coming of age in Huck Finn? We talked about it a little bit in the context of Ferris Bueller.
From what I remember, I think that so much of Huck's journey is not only about the physical adventure of taking this journey with Jim, but it's about meeting somebody who is very different than he is, but more than that, somebody who is very different than who he has been told that somebody like him might be, and starting to reorient himself to how he feels about that and what that might mean for his perspective going forward. And like we were talking about before, this is a world in which Huck's typical adult influences are no longer available to him. And one of the problematic things about Huckman, if I'm remembering correctly, is that Jim is really treated as a child in the way that he's written and in their relationship. So Jim is an adult. There are adults in this book, but the way it's written, I think it's like Huck's going to go off and figure out how to be an adult. He's with an adult. But I do think at the core, probably the way that Mark Twain wrote it, it's okay, here's a little boy who has to go figure out how he wants to how he wants to see people who are different than he is when others aren't telling him what to think.
And so, in terms of the way Twain wrote it, I think it's interesting that Ernest Hemingway called it the great American novel. And part of the
Mm,
reason is because of the way he wrote it with the dialect.
yeah.
And I'm wondering, do you see this as the great American novel?
I don't know if I
You could be
believe in the
honest
great
if you don't
American. I
think
don't
so, because I don't think
yeah.
so.
I don't think so, but I don't know that I believe in the great American novel. I think that when we deem something the great American novel, we are robbing a lot of other novels of the recognition that they deserve. And I think if I've learned anything in publishing, and of course it's different now than it's always evolving, but it's really hard to get a book published. And it's really hard even once you get a book published to get people to care about it. And so I guess I don't necessarily buy the fact that a novel isn't a book that was published and like nobody ever found out about it, or a book that, is waiting in somebody's drawer somewhere because they weren't able to publish it. So I don't know that I believe in it, but if we are going to buy into the idea that there is a great American novel, this isn't it for me.
I
I
think
like,
that's fair. I like the way you described it because I just always thought of The Great Gatsby as the great American novel, but I
yeah,
like your description because you know how sometimes there'll be this cute little story where a book takes off on TikTok that like, "Yo, my
yeah.
dad wrote this book and no one read it." And then all of a sudden, the great American novel could be anywhere right now.
I guess if you want to call my book the great American novel, fine. But I just think we should always be making space for what somebody else is going to consider the next great American novel. Our culture is always shifting so much that I think we need a different book at different times. And so I think the book that we need as the great American novel is going to shift over time.
Yeah, that's a good point too, that we want to continue to consider things as time progresses. You read Huck Finn with your husband a few years ago for your podcast. That was one of my absolute first classic novels that I read. So I think I read it in ninth grade as required
I,
reading.
I think
And
that's when I read it for the first time.
so I thought it was interesting that I always looked at Huck Finn at more in that time as the adventure of it. And I think that it was
Mm,
really more when James came out, which is Percival
yeah.
Everett's Pulitzer Prize winning novel, which came out, I think, 2024. That
Mhm.
is Jim's version of the story.
Yes.
I think that's when I really put those coming of age themes into context of what I read
Yeah.
when I was a child.
What a twist in that book. Oh, that's a good twist.
Excellent
Yeah.
on audio.
Mm,
So I think we can move on. We have Catcher in the Rye by J.D.
yeah.
Salinger is next. And after being expelled from prep school, Holden Caulfield wanders around New York City, feeling disconnected from the phoniness of the adult world. As he struggles with grief and loneliness, he reveals his fear of growing up and losing innocence. And on Gilmore Girls, this is a great reference. Rory calls Jess Holden Caulfield. Could any reference ever be better? And it is also on Rory's and Paris's banned books poster. So, my first question
Yeah.
to you is, do you think of Jess as Holden Caulfield?
I do, but as you read the description of him, I'm reminded that I think all three of the main guys are Holden Caulfield in different ways. Logan has the prep school thing.
And
Uh,
his disagreement with his family,
yeah, exactly. And he's the black sheep in a wealthy family. Jess is obviously he is just like a Holden vibe. Dean,
rebel, disillusioned, angsty.
yeah, but Dean has that too, especially toward the end, the Lindsay era, of course, which it's hard to reconcile with early seasons. Dean, I think Dean has a little bit of a Holden thing going on too. He's a hot, mysterious guy,
I
a
never
little
would have thought of
surly.
it until you said it. But one of the things that rings most true to me about Dean is how sassy he is with adults like Lorelai.
Yeah.
And that's very Holden.
Yeah, I think that maybe Rory's type is just Holden.
I think we
Maybe
came to a really big realization right now.
you all heard it here first. So yes, I do think Jess is Holden, but I think they all are. I think that's just what Rory is drawn to, or maybe it's what Amy Sherman Palladino is drawn to as a writer.
And I loved when I listened back to your SSR podcast episode, you compared Holden to Gossip Girl, and I'm actually watching Gossip Girl for the first time right now. I
Oh,
absolutely love that reference.
yeah, it does feel very Gossip Girl. I probably read it maybe last year toward the end of 2024. It was the first time I'd read it. I think that often in Gilmore Girls is a great example where I knew that it was a book that was referenced quite a bit, but I just took it for granted. And my guests and I both were like, "Oh, this guy, he is so annoying." Which I actually think is a great it speaks to what we were just talking about, how the great American novel changes because for a lot of people and for many years, this was the great American novel. This is the great American novel. But for a lot of us, especially in 2025, 2026, this guy is not what we need. He is not the energy that we are looking for. He's just this disillusioned rich dude
Do we
in his
think
own
he
head a
actually
lot.
comes of age and how?
I think he thinks he does,
Yes, I think that's it.
but I don't think he does.
And do we know if this is the most required read?
I think it is.
I think so
I
too.
think it is, which is deeply upsetting to me.
Yeah, you're not a fan.
No, if anything, I feel I'd probably softened toward it because I have some distance, but we were mad about this book.
I'm pretty soft about it because we talked about the Great American Novel and how that looks in different years, but it also looks different in different ages. And I think that's why I'm soft to Catcher in the Rye because so many teenagers can identify with Holden Caulfield.
Yes, I do think that's true. And I think that's where he's a Jess. I can think about it better in 2006 when I was a teenager. He is the emo kid who is constantly listening to his iPod and listening to Jack's Mannequin or whatever, feeling his feelings. There's a version of that no matter the time or place. And that way, I think Holden is timeless but I just think that his concerns and his views on the world and the way he talks about women, no, hard pass for me.
You have a good memory.
Yeah, that sticks out for sure.
So why don't we move on to Deenie? We cannot talk
Mm,
about coming of age without talking about Judy Blume. And
yeah,
her book that is on Gilmore Girls is Deenie. This was written in 1973. Deenie dreams of becoming a model, but her life changes when she is diagnosed with scoliosis and must wear a back brace. She faces insecurity and identity issues and explores self love to accept herself. And the way we see this on Gilmore Girls is two times. One is that Lorelai says that she read this while she was pregnant with Rory. I think she said she read it either on the way to the hospital to give birth or in the
yes,
hospital giving birth. And
huh?
then April also read it. And I think that was April was wearing a brace. And I think
Yes.
that is the context in which she read it. So I just think it's interesting thinking about Gilmore Girls and Judy Blume and how belonging she is on that list. Do you have any
Mhm.
thoughts on why this book was selected above all of
Mm.
Judy Blume's catalog, including Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, which we know they would have read?
Yeah, that's an interesting fun fact. I wonder if it was just Amy Sherman Palladino trying to be offbeat
That's
and
what I thought. When I thought about it, Deanie is a fun word.
it is a fun word. I also think that Deenie is like the scoliosis book, but it's also the Judy Blume masturbation book.
Yeah.
And I wonder if including a mention of it in the show was Amy Sherman Palladino's nod to this was an important thing that Judy Blume put on the page for young readers. And that's a huge reason why the book has been banned. It's one of Judy
Right.
Blume's most banned books, I think. And for that reason, a lot of people haven't read it or even heard of it. So I wonder if it was ASP's nod to this should be a thing that we can talk about to
That
teenagers.
could be it. I hadn't
Yeah.
heard of it until Gilmore Girls either.
Yeah. It's a good one. And it is, here's a fun fact about it. I actually recorded an episode about Deenie within it was one of the very first episodes I recorded of the podcast in 2018. And my guest would not lean into the conversation about masturbation and about the book being about that. And it was one of two episodes that I never pushed live because that is the meat of the book. That's why it is so controversial. Yes, scoliosis is this ever present fear that I think we are taught to be on guard for in schools, especially if you grew up when we did, when there were those checks all the time. But this is what Judy wanted us to talk about. Maybe that was what Amy Sherman Palladino was going for.
Yeah, and Jenna Bush Hager always says when she
Mhm.
talks about her children reading books that she would rather them read from Judy Blume than go on Google or go on YouTube. So
Yeah,
we appreciate Judy Blume for that.
I appreciate her for so many things. I'm so excited for
Yes,
her biography to come.
me too. It's on my list. I heard Molly Ringwald narrates the audio, so I'm probably going to get that version.
Ooh, okay, it's on my list when I'm on tour. I'm gonna allow myself to shop at the indies where I'm on tour, and I think that might be one of the books I buy.
Nice. I actually just went to Judy Blume's bookstore in Key
Mhm.
West. She was
I've heard
not there, but I'm glad she wasn't there. I have this thing. I went to Parnassus Books. I don't need to meet my heroes. Anne Patch is a
yeah,
hero. Judy Blume is a hero. I am totally cool with just going and visiting and buying a signed copy and just enjoying that experience. I would be so nervous meeting either of them. They were both giants to me.
yeah, they're amazing. I remember when I went to Parnassus and Patchett wasn't there, but I was very excited to meet the store dogs because
Yes.
I had the fangirl moment about one of the store dogs.
I didn't meet the dog, but I got a dog sticker.
Okay,
I like to get a sticker at every bookstore and then put it on my laptop. So I got the dog with a Parnassus book sign.
that's
I
really
think it's
cute.
Sparky, right? Sparky Van Devender.
My big dog celebrity at that store was Mary Todd Lincoln Hoffman. This is a long time ago, so I don't know if she's still with us, but she was perfect.
And so as we talk about Deanie and we talk about that Deanie was all about acceptance and she had to go through the scoliosis. She wanted to be a model and she had scoliosis and it really impacted her self-esteem. And I think it actually makes sense in a modern context and in the context of your book because I thought about it. How do these books from the 1970s relate to children today? And so many children want to be influencers today. So do you
Mm.
think that there is something that modern children can take about influencing from Deanie?
Yeah, because I think Influencers are the modern models. And when Deenie was written, it was in this time when the ultimate goal was to be discovered as a model. There was this whole culture, and I remember reading about it somewhere, maybe while I was researching for the episode, but there's this whole cottage industry around being discovered. And we don't have that anymore, but we definitely have influencing. And I think any kid who is posting videos of themselves doing skincare or posting hauls or whatever it is, maybe they're hoping that they'll be discovered. And the corollary to that now is just getting shared a lot, or maybe you tag the right person and they share the video. So it's in some ways it's easier to achieve that level of fame. And I would imagine there's so many more ways that your insecurities could get in your way if you're choosing to live your life online as a kid.
I think it shows you're thinking about finding acceptance of yourself and finding that courage to do the things that you really want to do as a teen.
Yeah. And I think also Deanie's whole life has been about being told how pretty she is because she's beautiful. But what happens when this thing that's entirely out of your control, her scoliosis specifically, what happens when that makes you question a truth that you've always assumed about yourself? And that is universal.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really unique coming of age theme that I didn't even
Mhm.
think about in terms of this book, but it's right on point.
Yeah.
So we have our last book, which I think is the most fun to talk about. I loved your podcast episode on it. And if anyone listens to any of the four, I think that this is the one to listen to. It's also our most popular pick on our Rory Gilmore reading challenge. It is The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton,
Mhm.
which
Yep.
was written in 1967. And Ponyboy Curtis, a member of the working class greasers, becomes caught in violent conflict with the wealthier Socias. After a tragic incident forces him into hiding, he begins to see beyond social divisions and gains a deeper understanding of loyalty, loss, and growing up. And I think most people who are Gilmore Girls fans will recall some of the references. We have the puffs, which Lorelai calls them the socias.
Mhm.
And then another great moment is between Rory and Dean going, I believe it was on the way to the dance,
Yeah.
where they bridge the gap. They talk about the movie versus the book. And I think that totally makes sense. Where Rory says, call me Pony Boy, and then Dean calls her Pony Boy. And I think Dean is always trying to impress Rory and like things that she likes. And maybe he wouldn't read the book, but he did watch the movie. So I thought that was cute.
I had never read The Outsiders. I think most of my familiarity with it was actually from watching Gilmore Girls so many times over the years and hearing Ponyboy so many times. Yeah, I that was my primary, connection before, and I remember going into reading that book and being like, "This book isn't gonna be for me." It's about a bunch of teenage guys at a completely different time and place. I ended up really loving it and then learning so much about the author who was a teenage
Yes.
girl, which, like, twist. Who knew that S.E. Hinton was a teenage girl? And
Yes.
of course, even Hinton.
Because who better to write about coming of age than someone who is coming of age?
Yeah, and I think that's why the book resonates so much, and I really love the fact that she put herself in this very traditionally male space and mindset and wrote a book that went on to influence so many teenagers over the years.
I believe she was only 16 at the time she wrote it. And I love
Yeah.
how she wove the themes in. They talk about Stay Gold and Pony Boy, and that comes from Nothing Gold Can Stay, which is a Robert
Mhm.
Frost poem. And it's all about how when leaves bloom, their first color is gold, but it's the hardest to hold, that they very quickly turn other shades. And I
Mhm.
thought that was really interesting in the context of coming of age because it really is that change from childhood to adulthood. So I thought that was just so smart for a 16-year-old to include that in the book.
Yeah, she was clearly brilliant and so well read, and the kids in this book see so much heavy stuff. So I think if you wanna talk about coming of age in this literal sense of how do you handle hard things when they're thrown your way, The Outsiders nails it.
Yeah, to me, this is more traditional, how I traditionally think of coming of age because they're
Mhm.
dealing with tragedy. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of coming of age, there really is something that is that big momentous thing that happens where clearly nothing can ever be the same again. Of course, it can be more subtle as well, but traditionally, I think the way we see it most is through those really big moments. And they certainly had those.
Yeah, the community is really changed in this book. The things that happen are they impact everyone.
And we certainly also have kids figuring this all out on their own. If
Mhm.
anywhere, it is in The Outsiders that we see kids acting as adults.
Yeah, who needs
Were
grown-ups?
there any
Although
adults?
I don't think so, but I do think 15 or 16 or even 13 or 14 in whatever year this book came out is so different than in 2026, which was also something that was interesting about SSR overall was seeing how different how the same age might be depicted in such different ways by authors at different points in history.
And what I liked about this book that I can compare to Too Blessed to Stress is that
Mm,
I thought she did such a good job of giving teens a lesson without making it sound preachy. And that's what you did too.
thank you. Yeah, I hope so. And I also think there's a real intimacy in the friendships in The Outsiders, a softness, especially among young boys, which we see all too rarely. And I tried to get to the heart of that in my book too. Some real softness in relationships.
Yeah, I definitely see that in both of them. So, speaking of Too Blessed to Stress, and speaking of moving into your big publication day,
Yay.
where can readers find the book and find you?
Yeah, so you can find the book anywhere books are sold. I personally am a huge fan of indie bookstores and bookshop.org. If you don't have access to an indie near you, but you can get the book anywhere books are sold. You can find me on Instagram at Alli Hoff Kosik. You can find me online at allihoffkosik.com. There are tabs on my website for my podcasts, my Substack, and then there is a tab for the book and book events. So if you want to find out where else I'm traveling over the next couple of weeks, that will be there. And I would love to hear from you.
And speaking of indies, will it also be on Libro FM?
Yes, the audiobook is wonderful. It is, there's a full cast. I have had a lot of fun reading it, which is saying a lot because it's weird to read, to listen to your own words, but I've really enjoyed the experience. And I'm so pleased with how these voice actors have brought my characters to life. So it'll be on Libra FM, it'll be on Audible, all the places where you get your audiobooks.
Yes, we love a full cast.
Yeah.
All right, Allie. So it
Yes,
was
I hope
great
you
chatting with
come.
you about coming of age.
Yes, thank you for having me. Thanks everybody for tuning in. And yeah, it's been really fun. Thank you.
All right, bye.